Why did Jesus have to meet with Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration? Some places on earth seem to have a supernatural aura, almost as if they were touching heaven. The Mount of Transfiguration was one of those places. It seemed like the boundary between our world and the divine briefly disappeared. It was one of the most mystical events recorded in the New Testament. Imagine this. Jesus takes 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, to the top of a high mountain. They had no idea what they would find there, but upon reaching the summit, they encountered an unbelievable vision. Jesus, the man they knew, suddenly transforms, radiating an intense light like the sun. And as if that wasn't surprising enough, 2 illustrious figures from the past, Moses and Elijah, appear beside Jesus, conversing with him as old friends. He was transfigured before them, with his face shining intensely and his clothes becoming as white as light, as it says in Matthew 17 verse 2. But what if I told you that this mountain holds secrets not just for the disciples Peter, James, and John, but for all of us? In this video, discover the supernatural event and uncover the deeper messages that this resplendent experience on the mountain holds for each of us today. At that moment, Jesus was no longer the humble teacher or healer they knew. He was shining with divine glory. It was as if heaven itself had manifested, revealing his majesty right there on the mountain. The presence of Elijah and Moses, figures who lived centuries before, conversing with Jesus as old friends, was a powerful indication that he was deeply connected to Israel's history and prophecies. And just as this event began abruptly, it ended just as quickly. The cloud dissipated, Moses and Elijah disappeared, and Jesus returned to his normal appearance. However, the disciples would never forget that day. They had witnessed a glimpse of the true glory of Jesus, a hint of his real identity, the Son of God with a divine nature. They descended the mountain with their minds somewhat bewildered and their hearts overwhelmed. Yet, Jesus gave them strict instructions not to tell anyone what they had witnessed until after his resurrection. They obeyed these orders, but were filled with questions, pondering the true meaning of the vision and what Jesus' reference to his resurrection implied. Peter, known for his impulsiveness, intervened, saying, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, as it is written in Matthew 17 verse 4. Perhaps, at the height of his enthusiasm, Peter desired to preserve this moment by creating a lasting memorial of this divine meeting. However, the climax of the experience was yet to come. While Peter was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice came from the cloud proclaiming, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him," as it is written in Matthew 17 verse 5. This heavenly voice echoes another important moment, Jesus' baptism, in which a similar proclamation was made, narrated in Matthew 3 verse 17. This declaration left no doubt about Jesus' identity and mission. As they descended from the mountain, Jesus instructed them to keep silent about this vision until after his resurrection, indicating that although the Transfiguration had foreshadowed his glory, the complete story was yet to unfold with his death and resurrection. They kept this secret among themselves, discussing what he meant by rising from the dead, as it is written in Matthew 17 verse 1. On the other hand, Moses was a humble shepherd chosen by God to lead the Israelites on the journey out of Egypt. However, like all human beings, Moses was not exempt from mortality. Despite his crucial role and close relationship with God, he could not enter the promised land due to past transgressions. According to the book of Deuteronomy, it is written, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he was buried in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no man knows his burial place to this day. Deuteronomy 34 verses 5 to 6. Moses' earthly journey came to an end, but his story doesn't end there. Jumping forward hundreds of years, we find Jesus, the embodiment of divine love and salvation. While Moses represented the law given by God, Jesus embodied the grace and truth that flowed through him. The Transfiguration united the old and the new, the law and grace, Moses and Jesus. Moses' presence beside Jesus on the mount symbolized this connection between the past and the present, showing the continuity of God's salvation plan. Elijah, on the other hand, held a prominent position as one of the most influential and dynamic prophets of the Old Testament. He lived at a time when Israel had turned away from the true God and was worshiping idols, mainly during the reign of King Ahab and his wife Jezebel. Elijah's mission was to call the people of Israel back to the worship of God. But what exactly did the Transfiguration represent, and what was its significance? Why did it occur at this specific moment? The Mount of Transfiguration was not limited to a change in Jesus' appearance. It deeply symbolized Jesus' divine nature and his unique role in the grand narrative of the relationship between God and humanity. The Transfiguration was a brief moment in which Jesus revealed his divine aspect, establishing his connection with God and the continuation of the work initiated by past leaders like Moses and Elijah. For Peter, James, and John, this event served as a confirmation of their beliefs and an early glimpse of the wonders that were to come. The importance of the Mount of Transfiguration in the Bible lies in the fact that mountains were not merely geographical elevations. They were special places where divine and transformative encounters occurred. Because of their elevation, mountains seemed closer to heaven and, in a way, closer to God. A notable example is Moses' encounter with God on Mount Sinai, where he received the 10 Commandments that shaped the moral and spiritual framework of the Israelites for generations. The mountain became a meeting point between the divine and the earthly realm. In the New Testament, the Transfiguration of Jesus, with the disciples witnessing Moses and Elijah appearing and conversing with him, was not merely a display of divinity, but a moment of great significance. The Mount of Transfiguration represented divine confirmation. The heavenly voice that echoed from heaven confirmed Jesus' identity as the Son of God and emphasized the importance of his teachings. A place of revelation. Just as Moses received the law on Mount Sinai, the Mount of Transfiguration became the place where the disciples gained a deeper understanding of Jesus' nature and mission. Continuity. The presence of Moses and Elijah demonstrated the connection between the Old Testament and Jesus' mission, suggesting that Jesus was the fulfillment of the laws and prophecies of the past. The choice of the Mount of Transfiguration as the setting for this event underscored the undeniable importance of the Messiah that Jesus represented. The supreme act of sacrifice, in which Jesus removed the sins of the world and reduced the distance that separated humanity from its Creator, is of great significance. The Transfiguration of Jesus on the mountain represented a glimpse for Peter, James, and John of Jesus' glorious nature before his human incarnation and his future splendor. This event may have been the fulfillment of the earlier allusion made by Jesus when he mentioned that some of his followers would see him in his true form before they died, as reported in Matthew 16, verse 28. What exactly happened? The Bible does not provide a detailed account of the conversation between Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. However, according to Luke's account, they appeared in glorious splendor with Jesus and discussed the events that would soon take place in Jerusalem, in which he would play a crucial role. Luke 9, verses 30 to 31. In essence, the Transfiguration serves as a connecting moment, linking the stories and prophecies of the Old Testament with the New Testament revelation of Jesus as the Messiah. This mountain symbolizes the convergence of the past and present, highlighting Jesus as the link between them. This suggests that the conversation likely involved Jesus' imminent mission in Jerusalem, including his upcoming passion, death, and resurrection. After the astonishing spectacle on the mountain, where Jesus was transfigured before Peter, James, and John, revealing his divine nature and conversing with Moses and Elijah, the group returned to join the other disciples. The air must have been pregnant with awe as the 3 chosen disciples tried to comprehend what they had witnessed. As they approached the base of the mountain, they encountered a large crowd that included teachers of the law engaged in discussions with the disciples. The Transfiguration was a crucial moment that confirmed Jesus' identity as the divine Son of God. It was also a moment that foreshadowed the journey that lay ahead. The descent from the mountain can be seen as a metaphor for the challenges Jesus would face in his mission. While the mountaintop represented a place of divine revelation, the base was where the real-world problems awaited, such as the case of the boy possessed by a demon. After the Transfiguration, Jesus began to speak openly about his upcoming suffering, death, and resurrection. Thus, the Transfiguration was not just a moment of splendor, but also a preparation and confirmation for the events to come. From that moment on, Jesus began to instruct his disciples about the necessity of going to Jerusalem, suffering at the hands of the religious authorities, and being killed, with the promise of his resurrection on the 3rd day. Jesus is the solution to humanity's greatest dilemma. He represented the total fulfillment of ancient promises, prophecies, and laws. Through him, salvation became possible, and God's love was revealed in its fullness. In verse 1 of Matthew 17, we find a profound event that unites many aspects of the Scriptures. Mountains play a prominent role in biblical stories as places of encounters with God. Moses met God on Mount Sinai. Elijah had his transformative experience on Mount Horeb, and now Jesus chooses a mountain as the setting for a revelation of great importance. Moses and Elijah, 2 notable figures from the Old Testament, represent the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Moses personifies the law, having delivered the 10 Commandments to the Israelites, while Elijah symbolizes the prophets, known for his zeal for the Lord and for confronting idolatry. Their presence beside Jesus carries profound significance. Jesus is the fulfillment of both the law and the prophets. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, contains the prophecies and commandments given by God to the Israelites through the prophet Moses. However, the law was more than a set of rules. It functioned as a mirror that revealed humanity's imperfection and sinfulness. No one could perfectly obey the entire law, showing that everyone needed redemption. The Apostle Paul states in Romans 10 verse 4, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." This does not mean that the law has lost its importance, but that its purpose was fulfilled in Jesus, pointing to him as the answer to humanity's need for redemption. As for the fulfillment of prophecies, the story of Jesus fulfilling the prophecies represents God's eternal promise and plan for redemption. The Old Testament, a chronicle of the Israelites, is full of prophecies about the advent of a Messiah. These prophecies, spanning centuries, are like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be united by the coming of Jesus. He is the answer to the ancient promises and the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Old Testament. His ultimate goal was to lead humanity back to a right relationship with God. The Bible is more than a holy book. It is a legacy of wisdom, faith, and inspiration that has shaped the history of humanity. I hope this has enriched your understanding and appreciation of the biblical narratives. Don't forget to share what you thought of the video in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel to continue spreading the gospel to more people. Until the next video.